Okay, good morning, everyone. Hope you had a good weekend. Who do we have here? Aliana's here. Good morning. Thika's here. Good morning. Lily, hello to you. Adalbert, good morning. Luan is here, and Ella's here. Good evening, Ella, but hello. Mashid is here, and KC, and Jenna. Hello to all of you. Who else do we have here? Carmen's here. Good morning, Carmen. Who else? Who else? Who else? Min is here. Good morning to you, Min. All right. Okay. All right, so people are going to trickle in here. Good morning, Chiffon. People are going to trickle in here, but that's okay. I'll keep saying hello to you. Yeah, I hope you had a good weekend. I hope you relaxed a little bit and didn't work too hard. But yeah, let's jump into it, okay? So, just as a very quick review of what we were talking about last week. Actually, here's what we'll do today. I'll give you a little bit of a heads up there. Here's what we'll do. Good morning, Cindy. Um, I'll just give you a quick review of what we talked about last week, which was subsistence practices and foraging, or hunting and gathering. And then we were heading into the agricultural revolution. Before we did that, we talked a little bit about what critical thinking was as a skill and sort of how to use it. And so we talked about a few things, and we did a good job with that. I will very quickly review those things, and then we'll talk about this agricultural revolution thing. Okay, so that's what we'll do today. Morning again, Sam, and hi, Sabrina, to you. Okay, here we go. Quick review from Friday. So we were talking about subsistence, the idea that, not the idea, but the way we describe the way people get their food. Good morning, Ying. The way people get their food, right? And of course, how people get their food is very closely connected to the physical environment that they live in, right? So you can imagine that, yeah, the type of plants and animals that you use for food is connected to the types of plants and animals that are available to you, right? I think we could all very easily understand that. And we said that everything else about cultures rests on this foundation of how you get your food, right? People have to eat before anything else happens. And so the way people get their food is closely connected to how their culture is kind of structured and the meanings that they give to things. And that's a cultural ecology approach, we said. I'm going to jump through a few of these slides very quickly, but that's because you've seen all of them before, okay? So don't panic too much. We've gone through all of this before. So we were talking about hunter-gatherers, people who get their food from the natural environment. They don't grow any food themselves. They don't keep any animals like pigs or chickens. They hunt, they fish, and they gather. And we said that this was our subsistence strategy as humans for almost 300,000 years. Growing food and certainly buying food in a store is a very, very recent development in human history. For almost all of our history, we were hunter-gatherers, okay? We said that hunter-gatherers move around quite frequently in order not to exceed the carrying capacity of the land. Manish, good morning. And we said that most foragers move around in small groups, so 30 to 50 people. They move around a lot, and they hunt and gather, right? We said that most hunter-gatherers don't form any permanent settlements, so most foragers don't have villages or homes or anything like that. They're always moving around, and so they either build temporary shelters where they are, or they bring shelter with them, so tents or something like that. We said that these people had expert knowledge of their environment. They always knew where to find food at any time of the year. They knew how to predict the weather. They're really experts in their environment, and most of the time we find that hunter-gatherers are in excellent physical shape as well. And so, again, if you're thinking about what hunter-gatherers are like, think about athletes, because that's basically what you're dealing with. We said that foragers had an egalitarian social structure. So that was the idea that most people within a hunter-gatherer group are mostly equal. Hello, Pearly. Are mostly equal. And so, yes, you would give more respect to your elders. Yes, men and women would be treated a little bit differently. But for the most part, people have equality within a hunter-gatherer group. And they also, another important thing is that they share basically everything. Most hunter-gatherers don't have any sort of idea about private property. There's no such thing as my stuff and your stuff. Everything is shared, including and especially food. Everybody shares their food with everyone else so that everyone eats, right? And so we kind of divided up foragers into two groups. And so simple foragers were those that moved around a lot. They didn't have a lot of stuff. They didn't have a lot of possessions. Their social structure was one that was mostly equal. They didn't really store any food. They basically ate whatever food was available, whatever they happened to find, okay? And we contrasted that with complex foragers. And so those were foragers that were more similar to the people we see here in the west, on the west coast of North America, around Vancouver. Those people were what we would probably call complex hunter-gatherers. And so they did store their food. They did live in larger groups. They did live in villages that were semi-permanent. They would spend a part of the year there. And they did have some differences in terms of social status within the community. And they did own stuff. They did have things, okay? So their subsistence strategy was a little more complicated because there was more food available for them and they could stay in one place for longer. And so we said that today, very few people make their living by hunting and gathering. Hunter-gatherers have been kind of pushed to the edges of the map. Most of the world gets their food by pastoralism, by raising animals, or by farming, right? And again, that's probably not a surprise to any of us. We probably all knew that. But very, very few hunter-gatherers remain in the world. So on Friday, we talked about that. We pushed pause. And then we talked a little bit about this skill of critical thinking, okay? And we said that critical thinking is important because it helps us to determine what our beliefs are and why we should actually believe them in the first place. Or if somebody is trying to convince us of something, if they want us to believe something, it'll give us the tools to figure out if we should actually believe that thing or not. And I think this is a very important skill for us to have in the modern world. I said that there's a lot of information out there. Good morning, Michael. There's a lot of information out there, and it's becoming more and more important for us to be able to figure out what we should believe. That's okay. It's becoming more and more important for us to figure out what we should believe and what we shouldn't, okay? And I don't think, we probably don't have to go any further than the United States. And I'm not talking about the sort of George Floyd situation here, but just in general, what's happening in the United States. We don't have to go any further than that to see what happens when people don't know what to believe, when they believe things that are not well supported by evidence, and when they don't really know how to have a conversation with each other in sort of a critical way, or in a way that they can build understanding. I think we see a lot of that in the United States in general. Again, I'm not talking about George Floyd right now, but it creates chaos basically, and so it's a good idea for us to know how to do this. Okay. We said on Friday that we can really only evaluate claims that people make clear. So people have to be saying that something is true or isn't true. People have to be saying that something is the case or is not the case. We can't think critically about questions, okay? So we need someone who is trying to convince us that they have an answer, okay? And we said that what we wanted to do was either create or be able to determine arguments, okay? And so an argument isn't a fight in this context. It is a group of statements that is constructed in order to convince you that something is the case. And so it had a conclusion, the thing that someone wants you to believe. And then there were premises, right, that were support for that conclusion, reasons for you to believe that conclusion. And so I created this very simple argument here. Oops, where is my argument? There it is. I created this very simple argument about coffee, saying that you should all drink coffee because it's delicious and because it's inexpensive and because it will stimulate your brain and help you study and result in better grades. And then we went through the process of evaluating this argument. And so I asked you, do my premises logically support my conclusion? So were all of my premises potential reasons why someone might drink coffee? And I think for the most part we agreed that yes, someone might drink coffee for these reasons. Okay. Then I asked you, are my premises true, or is there a way I could demonstrate whether they are true? And so we talked for a little while, and I think we agreed that I could probably attempt to prove to you that coffee is delicious, or at least most people think coffee is delicious. I could probably prove to you that coffee is not super expensive. Again, it's relative to how much money you have, but I could probably prove that to you. And for the last premise, in terms of it helping you get better grades, maybe I could do some academic research and I could find some scientific studies that say that. Okay? So I think at the end we agreed that this was a fairly logical, valid argument, right? I have three premises that logically support my conclusion, and my premises are true, or I could probably find a way to prove to you that they're true. Okay? And so based on that, you created your own arguments, right? And we had them come up in the comments section, and I think I was pretty happy with what I saw. I think we saw that most people had a good grasp on what arguments were and what a conclusion was and what premises were. I think we did a pretty good job with that. You'll also remember we walked through a number of very simple arguments here, trying to figure out what the conclusion was and what the premise was. And if you remember, always remember the question, why should I believe this thing? Okay? Why should I believe this? And that will help you to identify where the premises are and where the conclusion is, okay? Because often if you ask yourself, why should I believe this thing? You will very quickly see that you've identified the conclusion correctly, and then you can find the premises, or you'll discover that it doesn't make sense, and either you don't have an argument or you've chosen the wrong thing as your conclusion, okay? So we walked through all of these and we did a good job with those. We talked about the fact that this isn't an argument, but this is, right? And we were able to show that, or we were able to identify that this was the conclusion of the argument and the other things were premises. We talked a little bit about Alicia here, who went to the bank, and we correctly identified that that's not an argument either, right? It's a little story that describes what happens to Alicia, but it's not an argument. And again, if we asked ourselves, if we thought the conclusion here was that Alicia was a victim of bank fraud, and we asked ourselves the question, well, why should we believe that? Why should we believe she's a victim of bank fraud? If you go through all the other sentences in this little story, you'll find that none of those are really support for that conclusion. And so I think we correctly identified that this isn't an argument. It's just a little story, okay? And then finally I said, don't confuse an explanation with an argument, right? An explanation says why something happened. An argument is trying to convince you that something is the way it is, okay? So arguments have something to prove. Explanations don't. Explanations tell you why, okay? Okay. Are we good? Give me a little thumbs up. Give me a little thumbs up there if you're with me and if we're good and if that all sounds familiar. If you remember that from Friday. I know Friday was a few days ago, but are we all good? Are we all good? Sam's good. Jana's good. All right. That all sounds vaguely familiar. Good. Min is good. Jafon's good. Ella's good. Karen and Pearlie and Mashid are good. Lily's good. Tika's good. Ying is good. Luan's good. All right. Awesome. Okay. So here's where these things come together. The critical thinking and the subsistence. We said Aliana's good. Did I mean Thursday? Oh yeah, I did mean Thursday. Sorry, Sam, we did the whole quiz thing on Friday. I forgot. I did mean Thursday. Everyone's good. Okay. So here's where this stuff comes together. The question we asked was, Casey's good, awesome. Why do humans start to grow their own food, right? Because we evolved as hunter-gatherers 300,000 years ago or so, and we were very successful as hunter-gatherers for a long time, right? For 300,000 years, that's a long time. Why do people start growing their own food? Why do they make this change to their subsistence strategy after success for so long? That's the question here, okay? So I showed you this little map on Thursday, and I said that agriculture, farming starts in different parts of the world at different times. And so probably in the Middle East, in what we would call Mesopotamia historically, is probably where agriculture first starts, around 10 or 12,000 years ago. And then it starts to pop up in other parts of the world at different periods. Now, this isn't a situation of, say the Mesopotamians telling the Egyptians about farming, and then the Egyptians tell people in Asia about farming, and then they tell people in New Guinea. It's not like that. People start to farm in different parts of the world independently and for their own reasons, okay? So this isn't a case of transmission. It's not one group telling another group how to do something. In this case, it's people choosing to do this in their own time, okay? But again, the place where this really starts is Mesopotamia, and then in Egypt around 10 or 12,000 years ago. So this is a big question, and what I said was the archaeological record is limited in terms of what it can tell us about when and how this happened. I said that there's no writing that relates to this. The first farming starts around 10 or 12,000 years ago. Writing is only invented 6 or 7,000 years ago, and so we don't really know what happened for that first part. There's no written records. We said there's not a lot of people in this early period. We said that just prior to the beginning of farming, there's probably only 5 or 8 million people on the entire planet. That's not very many people, and so they don't leave a lot of stuff behind for archaeologists to dig up. And so we don't really have a lot of archaeological remains from this period. The other thing is that this likely took generations to change. And so we shouldn't think of this as hunter-gatherers waking up one morning and saying, okay, guys, let's farm. That's not how it worked. Switching from a hunting and gathering subsistence strategy to a farming subsistence strategy probably took quite a long time. And so it didn't just happen right away. But still, why? Why do people make this change? And so that brings us to this article here. It's an article written by Jared Diamond. Jared Diamond is a pretty popular historian, or a popular historian. He's written a number of books that have gone on to be bestsellers, so a lot of people have read his stuff. And here he lays out his idea of how and why human beings switch to agriculture. Why did people start to farm in the first place? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to read this article, but I'd like you to read it maybe a little differently than you're used to. Okay, so normally the way we might read things is we might read things passively. Okay, so we just might read it and see what it says. Or as students, more likely, we might be trying to read it and sort of memorize it, right? To try and remember all the important details, because that's kind of how we've been trained as students. But how I'd like you to read this article this time is in a way that you are looking for Jared's argument. Okay, so Jared is going to try to convince us of something, right? He's going to give us a conclusion, and then he's going to give us some premises. Hopefully he's going to give us some reasons to believe the thing that he believes. And so I would like you to read through that in an attempt to figure out what he is arguing. Okay. The other thing I'll maybe give you a little bit of a advance notice on in this article is that in a way there's kind of two arguments in here. There's an old argument, so there's an old way of seeing things, and then Jared is trying to say, yeah, but that one was wrong. My idea is correct, and here's why my idea is correct. Okay, so there's kind of two things in there happening. He's going to talk about the way that some people see this change to agriculture, then he's going to talk about the way that he sees it. And so I'm telling you because I don't want you to get confused between the two arguments. Okay, so he'll talk about an earlier argument, and then he'll talk about his. Okay, so what I'll do is this. I'll ask you to read it. Now I've put the article in Microsoft Teams under Files, and I've also put it in Student Portal under Course Documents. And so you can read it in either of those places. And at the end, I've got just a few questions for you to answer. And so I think what I'd like you to do is this. I'll give you about half an hour to read the article and hopefully answer the questions, okay? And then after you're done that, we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and discuss what we've seen, okay, or what we think the answers are, okay? So it's about 10:30 now, so I'll give you half an hour to read it. That'll take us to 11, 10-minute break, and so we'll start back here at 11:10, okay? So at 11:10, have that article read and have the questions answered as well. The questions are at the end of the article. And make sure you type out your answers because we want to put them into the live chat, and it'll take too long if you're trying to type from scratch. Okay, so type them as you go, as you answer them, and then we'll try to get that going in the live chat. Does that sound okay? Thumbs up or thumbs down, or any questions? Maybe put them into the live stream there. So read that article, answer the questions. The questions are about trying to figure out Jared Diamond's argument. And then 11:10, we're back here and we will see if we can figure out his argument and understand it, okay? Okay, so Casey's good, Sabrina's good, Pearlie's good. Sam, the article is in Microsoft Teams under Files, or it's in Course Documents on Student Portal. It's in both of those places. Ying's good, Karen's good, Yana's good. Okay, if you have any questions while you're reading, you can either put them into the live chat here on YouTube, or you can ask them in Microsoft Teams and I can answer them there. There may be a few things that you are confused about, and so you can ask them while you're reading and I'll respond to them in one place or the other because I'm still here, okay? So I'm gonna turn you loose, read it, answer the questions as best you can, then we'll talk, okay? Let's do it. Okay, and we're back. So, quick question for you. Did I give? I felt like I gave you too much time to read that, but did I give you too much, or not enough, or just right, or what do you think? Was that enough time to read that article, or how did that go? How'd that go, people? Too much time? Not no, not too little. Okay. Okay. Aliana says it's not too little. I know that your responses might be a little biased here. Maybe the other thing I'll ask you too is, um, how easy of a read was this article for you? So, um, maybe like on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being this is a really difficult article and I could barely understand it, to 10, it was super easy to read. What was questions were confusing? Okay, that's okay, Karen. We'll sort that out. Um, that's understandable. That's understandable. What else do you think? Scale of 1 to 10, 1 being really hard, 10 being really easy. About a 5. Okay, that's good to know. What else did you think? Sabrina says it's an 8. Okay, a 5. Okay, 8 to 9. Okay, 7. Yeah, it's about right. 5. Good. Okay. Yeah, in some ways it's easy and in some ways it's not. He tries to, I think Jared tries to write for, not for scientists, but for kind of regular people. And so sometimes he tries to be funny and sometimes he references things. And, if you're kind of tuned into his way of speaking or his sense of humor, then I think it helps. It helps make it easier to read. But then if you're kind of out of alignment with his sense of humor, you might find it difficult. Either way, that's okay. We're gonna work through this. So let's start with Jared Diamond's argument. Okay, let's start with his argument. Now, in the live chat here, what do you think is his conclusion? What do you think the main thing he wants us to believe with this article is? What's the conclusion? What does he want us to believe? The main thing he wants us to believe. Let's see how we do here. What is the thing Jared Diamond wants us to believe? What is the thing Jared Diamond wants us to believe? Okay. Karen says adapting to agriculture was a bad thing. Ying says it's bad for people to develop agriculture. KC, that we struggle with agriculture. Okay. Let's see what else we can get here. Don't be afraid to put an answer in there, whether it's right or wrong. It doesn't matter. It's part of the process, right? So if you're right, you're right. That's great. If you're wrong, that's okay too, because we can figure out why the answer is wrong, or maybe you're thinking about something different. So just throw what you have up there. Okay, there's no judgment. There's no there's no penalty. Tika says shift to agriculture helps people progress. Um, that is a conclusion, but that's not Jared. That's not Diamond's argument. That's the other one. So that's an important piece, Thika. But we'll talk about that one in a minute. Aliana says adapting to agriculture is not a good idea. Chris says farming or agriculture is less effective than hunting and gathering. Okay. Most people, I think, if a few more pop up here, that'll be okay. I think most people have identified Jared Diamond's argument, right? And so, Karen, you're right there. Yeah, adapting to agriculture is a bad thing. It's bad that we have switched to agriculture. We have struggled now that we have shifted to agriculture. Not a good idea, right? And not always, but it is. But it's right there in the title in this case, right? He says it's the worst mistake in the history of the human race, right? So it's not always in the title, but in this case it is. Ella, yeah, progressing to agriculture has brought a number of disadvantages. So yeah, you're right. This is the thing that Jared Diamond wants us to believe, that switching to agriculture was actually a really bad idea. Okay. Now, again, as good critical thinkers, we should ask ourselves the question, why should we believe you, Jared? Why should we believe that switching to agriculture was a good idea? After all, I think most of us can agree that we live a life now that's based on agriculture, right? All of our food is grown for us for the most part. And I think we all are pretty happy with our food situation, right? We can just walk down the street to the store and buy whatever kinds of food we need. We've got lots of healthy food available to us, lots of unhealthy food, but that's another story. And so why should we believe him? Why should we believe that switching to agriculture was a huge mistake? So let's see if we can identify some of the premises, okay? So some of the reasons why we should believe that switching to agriculture was a big mistake for us humans. So what does he say? So now we're looking for premises. So now we're looking for Diamond's premises. What does he... so Carmen says, yeah, agriculture has had some negative consequences. Such as, what kind of negative consequences have us human beings suffered since switching to agriculture? What do you think? What do you think? Pearlie says agriculture was bad for health. Yes. Karen says there are diseases. Yes. Chris says people have sacrificed quality for quantity. Yes. What else? What else? Casey says agriculture caused malnutrition and disease and death. Yeah, that's good. Ying says it has produced a social class, right? Jared says there's a group of people now that have been able to put themselves above others, right? And sort of control them, use power over them. What else? What else? There's at least one more, I think. There's at least one more. Another premise. So far we put together, yeah, Ella says food is no longer diverse as compared to hunters. That's definitely true. There it is. So Eliana says sexual inequality. Yeah, so I think those are the main three premises of Jared Diamond's argument, right? So his conclusion was that switching to agriculture was a bad move, right? Humans never should have done that. And so, again, as good critical thinkers, we should ask, why not? Why should we believe you, Jared? And Jared's saying, well, we have some negative consequences associated with this, right? As it turns out, agriculture was detrimental to the health of human beings. It produced some sexual inequality, and it's produced a social class as well, right? So we have three premises that support that conclusion: poor health, sexual inequality, and class divisions. And so those are kind of, I think those are Jared Diamond's three main premises. And then he's got more, he's got more evidence under the surface, but we'll get to that. I want to go back to Thika's statement here, because this was the argument about progress, right? This was the other argument that is in the paper that Jared Diamond is kind of fighting against, if you will, right? So he says that there's a progressivist argument. And so the progressivist argument says that people switched to agriculture because human history is about progress, right? We're constantly getting better and better. And so what are some of the premises to that argument? Why, if that argument, the progressivist argument, is humans switched to agriculture because it was better, because it was progress, because it made life better for them. And so if we wanted to believe that, what are some of the premises to that argument? So why was agriculture better for humans according to the progressivist argument? Okay. There's two comments here. Population increase, we'll get to that, Karen. And this gap between the rich and the poor, I think, is part of Jared's argument as well. Just see here. So okay. So Ying says capturing animals is a barbaric act. I'm not sure if he says that, but it's possible, right? Some people might look at hunting and gathering and saying, this is awful, right? You have to go out every day and, stab an animal in order to survive. How barbaric, how awful, right? Farming is much more peaceful, right? You're just cultivating your crops and you don't have to kill animals all the time. Okay, that is possible. What else? Why else do the progressivists say that switching to agriculture was a good thing? Switching to farming was a good thing? What do they say? Why, from the progressivist side, why should we believe that agriculture is a good thing? Casey says, so Casey says the progressivists say there's plenty of leisure time and you don't have to work. Okay. So the progressivists felt that farming was easier than hunting and gathering. Okay, so they had this idea that, hunter-gatherers were constantly wandering the landscape, walking tens of kilometers every day, which was true, struggling to find food, and yet farming was a lot less work. So the progressivists felt that the farmers did less work and then they had a lot of free time to do other things. Pearly. So the progressivists felt that farmers were saving time. They felt that you got more food for less work. They felt that it increased production, which was sort of true. Yeah, they felt that agriculturalists had more free time. Yeah, the progressivists felt that it was an effective way to get more food for less work. Yes, um, and it was a continuous food supply. So progressivists felt that when asking why humans would switch to agriculture, well, of course, why wouldn't you, right? It was less work, there was more food, you had more leisure time, you could store your crops, so you could save for, winter or for other times of the year. Um, it was less barbaric, perhaps. Um, there was a feeling of security because you always knew where your food was, right? You always knew you had some stored away in your cellar or wherever. And so you didn't have to constantly go out and search for more food. Um, so the progressivists had all of these ideas in the argument saying that humans switched to agriculture because, of course, because it was better. Um, but as Jared Diamond kind of points out, or as he kind of goes through, it turns out that none of those premises are really, well, some of them are true, but some of them are not. Um, One of the progressivist premises was that um, hunting and gathering is a lot of work. You've got to struggle to get food, and farming is actually less work. But as it turns out, that's not the case at all. Um, as you read in the article, most hunter gatherers don't really work that much. They work for a few hours a day gathering their food or going hunting, but then they actually have a lot of free time. So, like I mentioned earlier, hunting and gathering or foraging, it's not a lot of work. It's not a difficult way to make a living. It's just very skill based. You really have to know what you're doing, but it's not that physically difficult. As it turns out, farming is actually a lot of work. There's a lot of carrying of water, there's plowing, there's digging, there's weeding, there's building fences, there's trying to get rid of pests, there's grinding of wheat. Farming is actually a lot of work. Now, you can produce large quantities of food this way, but it's definitely not easier than hunting and gathering is. It's true that with hunting and gathering, you can store your food, although we did see that some hunter gatherers store their food as well. But basically, what was happening is that the hunting and gathering lifestyle isn't as bad as the progressivists thought. So, hunter gatherers aren't always starving. You read in the paper that the modern day hunter gatherers, which were studied by doctors, they're in really good health, they get lots of calories. And when you ask them, well, why don't you grow your own food? They say, well, why should we? Because there are so many mongongo nuts in the world, right? They find it so easy to find food in the natural world. They say, well, why would we go to the trouble to grow our own when there's so much around us? So the progressivist argument, basically what Jared Diamond is saying is that it's built on a false premise. It's built on the idea that farming is easier than hunting and gathering, and it's not true. And so Jared Diamond builds an argument based on the idea that switching to agriculture is actually a bad thing, and it's a bad thing because of poor health, because it creates gender inequality, and because it creates class divisions. Let's talk about the health issues here, and that's question 3. So, what data? Oops, what data does Jared Diamond use to prove that the health of these early farmers declined? Okay, so this is evidence, right? So it's just like the coffee argument. We have a conclusion, we have a premise that switching to agriculture was bad for people's health, and now we need to establish whether it's true, right? How do we know that farming was bad for the health of early farmers? What kind of data does he give us? What kind of evidence does he give us? What kind of evidence does Jared Diamond give us that farming was bad for the health of these early farmers? Ying says, let's see. Okay, so I guess this is connected to it. But the idea here is that hunter-gatherers eat a lot of different foods, right? They eat a lot of different types of foods. And so that gives them a wide variety of nutrients. And if they can't find one type of food, there's always lots of other types of food that they can eat. Early farmers, the problem that they face is that most of their calories, most of their food comes from one place. And so it might be wheat, and so they might be making a lot of bread. If you're in Southeast Asia, it might be rice. And so a lot of their calories, a lot of their daily diet is coming from this one thing. And so if the crop fails, then you have a big problem, because that's most of your that's your main food source. If your crop fails, you're probably going to starve. The other thing we see is that a lot of the crops that people are growing, so wheat or barley or rice, if you look at their nutritional content, you will see that they actually don't have a lot of nutrition in them. Okay, so they have calories, and so if you eat them, your body can use them for fuel and you can survive. But if you look at sort of vitamins and minerals and amino acids and fatty acids and things like that, things your body needs, crops like that don't have a lot of that stuff in them. And so they're not a very healthy source of calories. They just kind of help your body continue to move around. So focusing on one crop like rice or wheat or potatoes or something doesn't give you the wide variety of nutrients that hunting and gathering does. Ellis says that there's some data about life expectancy at birth. It goes from 26 years to 19 years. Now, if you think that both of those sound low, they are. But the reason that they're so low is not because if you look at an average life expectancy of 26, it doesn't mean that hunter-gatherers were dying before 26 years old and they were dying. What was happening is that at the time, many children died before the age of 2. So many of them died in the process of being born, and many others died before they reached the age of 2. And so that kind of pulls the average down. And so it makes the average look a lot lower than normal. And so in a hunter-gatherer group, yeah, people would live into their 40s and maybe into their 50s. They wouldn't get to 80 or 90 years old. But they would live past 26. It's just that so many children die because there's no medical care that it pulls the average down. But still, you can see that the life expectancy drops, right? It goes from 26 to 19. And so farmers don't live nearly as long as hunter-gatherers did before them. Purley says with the adoption of agriculture, height crashed. And so the height that you grow to, how high or how tall you grow, is partly genetic, but it partly has to do with the nutrition that you receive as a child. And if you don't receive enough nutrition, then you won't actually grow to your full height. And so here we see that the average height for hunter-gatherers, I think for men, is 5'9", and then it drops to, I think, 5'6" or 5'3", I forget what he says. So there's a big decrease in height, and that's not necessarily genetic. That has to do with poor nutrition for early farmers. What else does he mention? What else does Jared Diamond mention? Markers of poor health. Markers of poor health. How can we tell that early farmers had poorer health than the hunter-gatherers that came before them? What kind of evidence is there? What kind of evidence is there for that? Yeah, so actually, Karen, we should have mentioned that a little bit earlier, but you're right. This evidence comes from skeletal remains. It comes from skeletons that we find in archaeological sites. And so we're able to go to the same place in the world and see, we're able to dig up the bones of hunter-gatherers from earlier, and then we're able to dig up bones of early farmers from centuries later or from thousands of years later, and we can compare these two groups, and that's how we're getting some of this data. So we know that farmers didn't grow as tall as hunter-gatherers did. We know that they didn't live as long as hunter-gatherers did. What else do we see in their bones? What else do we see in their bones? Okay, so another thing. Oh, right. We can definitely see, Karen, we can definitely see injuries that they might have attained or sustained. Yeah, we can see how they may have hurt themselves in life if they've broken bones or things like that. We can see that. Actually, I think you have. I thought somebody mentioned something earlier. Oh, yeah, here we go. KC did. We also see in these skeletons evidence of malnutrition, okay, and disease and death. We've got some time. Let me show you a couple things here, okay? So I'll just go through these slides really quickly here. So in this article, we said Diamond is reacting to a progressivist theory. So the idea that human history is this long story of progress, and Jared is saying, not necessarily, right? He says, as we agreed, that humans' choice to switch to farming is a huge mistake, right? We really shouldn't have done this thing. And the first premise that we're talking about now is that there was an overall decline in the health of early farmers as compared to the foragers that came before them. So let me show you what this looks like here. I think you can see if you look at the teeth of this person. So these are the. It's actually right here. You're looking at a piece of a maxilla. So it's the top part of somebody. You can see this person's teeth and kind of the bone that goes right here. And so if you look at these teeth, you can see these little ridges running along the top of the teeth. Okay, and what that's called is enamel hypoplasia. And I think you'll remember Jared Diamond mentions this in the article. And so with enamel hypoplasia, what's happening is that when this person was a child and their adult teeth were still forming in their gums, this person went through a few periods where there wasn't a lot of food. They went through periods of malnutrition. And what happens is if there's not enough food, if your body is starving and you're a child, your body will start to shut off certain things to kind of save power, if you will. And so one of the things it shuts off is the creation of enamel in your teeth. And so then when the food comes back and the person's able to start eating again, the enamel will start to form again. And so because our enamel on our teeth only forms when the teeth are growing, we don't get any more enamel at any time in our life. Because of that, these little ridges remain on their teeth for the rest of their lives. And so you can pretty clearly see a few periods, at least 2 periods of malnutrition when this person was a small child. You see this a lot on farmers. You don't see it very often on hunter-gatherers. Here you can see the skull of a person. And so what you're looking at here is you're looking at the top part of their skull on the right side. Okay, and so you can see kind of a joint, a suture in their skull that goes this way, and you can see one a little bit at the back. And so you're looking at just the top part. And what you're seeing here is parodic hyperostosis. And so what happens here is that when a person has a disease, and it has to be a disease that they suffer with for a long time, like tuberculosis. A cold won't do it. The flu won't do it. Any disease that you get really quickly and die won't do it. You have to be kind of suffering with a disease for a long, long time. Your body will start to borrow things back from itself. And so it'll start to pull minerals and things out of the bone in order to help fight the disease. And so one of the places that you see this happening is in the skull. And so you see this kind of parodic hyperostosis where your body is pulling things out of the bone to try and fight the disease. And again, it changes the bone. So you can see this person was sick, and this person was sick for a long time. You can also see it sometimes here on the inside of the eye socket. And so here you're looking at the inside of someone's right eye socket, kind of up here behind the eyeball. And you can see that's not supposed to be all kind of bubbly like that. It's supposed to be nice and smooth. And so again, we see this is cribra orbitalis, I believe. But again, we see that the bone is being changed. It's being remodeled because of a disease that someone is suffering with. Okay, let me show you a little bit more here. Here you can see a few different pieces of a person's backbone or a person's spinal column. And so on the left, you can see this is kind of midway up the back, kind of the middle of your back. The ones on the right are the lower part of your back. And you can see that some of these vertebrae here, some of these parts of your backbone, they kind of look bubbly. They look like Swiss cheese. They've got a bunch of holes in them. And that's not normal. The way that these should look is the piece of bone that's on the top on your right. That's kind of what it should look like. It should look solid, maybe a little bit rough, but that's kind of normal. But all of these holes that are going through the vertebrae, those are not normal. And so again, this is evidence of disease. And in this case, it's evidence of tuberculosis, I believe. So this is kind of some of the tools that archaeologists will use to determine the health of a population. So their height, their age at death, evidence of malnutrition like the enamel hypoplasia on the teeth, but also the condition of the bones. And so again, if you have people that are suffering with diseases like tuberculosis for a long period of time, it will actually start to remodel their bones. And so the photos I showed you here are evidence that archaeologists could use to talk about the overall health of a population. Okay, so we've only got a few minutes left here. Does anyone have any questions? We're not quite done with this article. We'll have to pick it up tomorrow and just kind of, tie a bow on it. But do you have any questions for me at the moment based on this article or any of the pictures I've just shown you or anything? Or how are we? Are we good? Are we okay? Are there questions? Are there comments? Did those bones look freaky and weird, or think? Karen's good. No cues for Cindy. Okay. Casey's good. Ella's all good. Okay, so tomorrow we'll come back to that article. We'll tie it up. Liana's good. That's awesome. Carmen's good. Pearlie's good. We'll come back to this article and we'll kind of finish it up. And then probably talk a little bit about evidence. And then we might move on to kind of the very first agricultural civilization. So we'll probably move on to Mesopotamia tomorrow, I'm thinking. So that's probably where we'll start. Okay, so Adalbert's good, Sabrina's good, Ying is good, and Thika's good. Okay, so pretty much out of time, so I'll end it there. And tomorrow, like I say, we'll finish up with this article and we'll start moving into our first civilizations, so specifically the ones in Mesopotamia, okay? Yeah, so until then, thank you all for being here. Thank you for interacting. Glad to see you here after the weekend. And yeah, and we'll talk to you tomorrow, okay? So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.